I, 32M, need to share this story that's been consuming me for the past few months. It's about how my parents manipulated me into buying them a house, only to hand it over to my younger sister Perry, 29F, and what happened when I finally decided I'd had enough. Fair warning, this is a long and complicated story about family manipulation, financial abuse, and finally, standing up for myself. Growing up, my family walked a constant financial tightrope. We weren't living in poverty, but there was always this underlying tension about money. My dad, 58M, was what you might call a serial entrepreneur, except none of his ventures ever really succeeded. He'd jump from job to job, always chasing the next big opportunity. One month he'd be selling life insurance, convinced he was going to make it big in the industry. The next, he'd be trying to start a home renovation business, despite having minimal experience. Each new venture came with the same cycle: initial excitement, growing frustration, and inevitable failure. Mom, 55F, was the eternal optimist, always defending Dad's choices. "Your father is a visionary," she'd tell us during dinner, right after he'd quit another stable job to pursue some risky venture. "He just needs one big break." She worked part-time jobs to help keep us afloat, but her real job was maintaining this facade of normalcy while our financial situation was anything but normal. The dynamic between me and my sister Perry was like night and day. From an early age, I was designated as the irresponsible one, the family's ticket to a better future. Every decision I made was scrutinized through this lens. I remember when I was 14 and wanted to join the school band. Instead of supporting my interest in music, my parents sat me down for a serious discussion about how computer club would look better on college applications. Meanwhile, Perry could pursue whatever fleeting interest caught her fancy: art classes one month, dance lessons the next, all funded by my parents somehow finding money we supposedly didn't have. The pressure really ramped up in high school. I maintained a 4.0 GPA, not because I was naturally brilliant, but because anything less was unacceptable. One semester, I got an A in AP Physics, and you'd think I'd committed a cardinal sin. Dad wouldn't speak to me for days, except to make pointed comments about how mediocrity isn't an option for someone who needs to support their family. The same week, Perry skipped 3 days of school to hang out with her friends, and Mom just shrugged it off with a teenager's need to express themselves. I spent my high school years in this pressure cooker of expectations. While Perry was finding herself, I was expected to map out a detailed plan for financial success. I'd stay up until 2 a.m. studying, running on energy drinks and anxiety, while Perry would breeze and pass curfew without consequences. The contrast was stark. My B+ in calculus warranted a family meeting about my declining standards, while Perry's string of DS and FS was met with, "The traditional education system just doesn't suit her learning style." When it came time for college, my parents made it clear that my only option was tech school. Not because it aligned with my interests, they never asked about those, but because it offered the quickest route to a high-paying job. They took out loans and drained what little savings they had, making sure I understood the magnitude of their sacrifice at every turn. "We're eating ramen so you can have a future," Mom would say, though mysteriously there was always money for Perry's latest hobby or adventure. Tech school was brutal. Not just because of the demanding coursework, but because of the constant pressure from home. I worked part-time at a computer repair shop between classes, lived on the cheapest meal plan possible, and still got daily reminders about the investment my parents had made in me. Every phone call included an update on their financial struggles and not-so-subtle hints about how soon I'd be able to pay them back. Meanwhile, Perry dropped out of high school in her senior year. Instead of the drama I would have faced, my parents actually celebrated her decision. "School isn't for everyone," they said. "She's brave for choosing her own path." She spent the next few years exploring her options, which meant cycling through a series of part-time jobs, none lasting more than a few months. Barista, retail clerk, dog walker, yoga instructor trainee, each new job was heralded as her true calling until she inevitably quit because it wasn't fulfilling her soul. After graduating from tech school, I landed a job at a growing tech company. The salary wasn't anything extraordinary by industry standards, but it was more money than my family had ever seen. I remember calling my parents to share the news, hoping for just one moment of pure celebration. Instead, Dad immediately started calculating how much I could send them each month, while Mom began listing all the bills they needed help with. I moved in with 2 roommates in a cramped apartment to save money. It wasn't ideal, I was making enough to afford my own place, but I felt obligated to live frugally so I could help my parents. Every month, I'd send them money, trying to balance their needs with my student loan payments and basic living expenses. But it was never enough. If I didn't send extra one month, Dad would call with a guilt-laden speech about how they'd sacrificed everything for my education. Work became my refuge. I threw myself into projects, earned a reputation as someone who could handle complex problems, and started moving up the corporate ladder. Each promotion or bonus should have been a victory, but instead became another source of pressure. The questions weren't, "Are you proud of yourself?" or "What are your goals?" but always, "So you'll be able to help us more now, right?" Perry continued her pattern of sporadic employment and impulsive decisions. She'd move in with friends, then back home when things fell apart. Start online courses, then abandon them halfway through. Each failure was met with understanding and support from our parents. "She's still young," they'd say, even though she was well into her 20s. "She just hasn't found her passion yet." The real turning point came during what I thought would be a normal Sunday dinner at their rental apartment. I'd been noticing more hints than usual about their financial struggles, but I wasn't prepared for what came next. Dad started talking about how tired they were of renting, how their landlord was raising the rent again, and how they deserved a place of their own after all these years of investing in the family's future. I knew where this was heading, but the directness still caught me off guard. Mom reached across the table, took my hand, and said, "Honey, we've been thinking. You're doing so well now, and we've sacrificed so much to get you there. Don't you think it's time you helped us get a house?" When I mentioned that I was barely managing my own rent while trying to save for my future, they unleashed years of accumulated guilt. Dad spoke about how they could have saved for retirement but chose to invest in me instead. Mom cried about how they just wanted some stability in their final years. Perry, who happened to be staying with them at the time, chimed in about how I was living comfortably while our parents struggled. The pressure campaign lasted months. Every phone call included casual mentions of houses they'd seen. Mom would send listings just to look at. Dad would tell stories about their friends' children who had done right by their parents by buying them homes. Even Perry got involved, texting me about how our parents deserved this one thing after everything they'd done for me. I tried to resist, but decades of conditioning had left me vulnerable to their manipulation. The guilt became overwhelming. I'd lie awake at night, thinking about their sacrifices, their aging, their need for stability. My therapist, yes, I finally started seeing one, warned me about setting boundaries, but years of family dynamics aren't easily overcome. Finally, after months of psychological warfare, I gave in. I had saved up a decent amount for a down payment, money that should have gone toward my own future. But I convinced myself this was the right thing to do. I told myself that once they had their house, the guilt trips would stop. They would finally be satisfied, and I could start focusing on my own life. The house I bought wasn't anything fancy, a modest 3-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood. The monthly payments were a stretch, but I figured I could manage if I continued living with roommates and maintaining my frugal lifestyle. For the first few months, everything seemed fine. My parents were thrilled, showing off of their house to friends and family, talking about how their son had done right by them. But the requests didn't stop, they multiplied. They needed new furniture because the old stuff doesn't look right in this nice house. They wanted to landscape the backyard because the neighbors might judge us. Every request came with the familiar guilt trip, "After all we've done for you." I kept making the mortgage payments, even sending extra when I could to try to pay it off faster. I was still living with roommates, still putting my own life on hold, but I told myself it was worth it to give my parents the stability they'd never had. I ignored the warning signs, the way they started talking about how good it would be for Perry to have a stable place nearby, the casual mentions of how she was helping them settle in. Looking back, I should have seen what was coming. All the signs were there, but I was so conditioned to put their needs first that I missed them completely. What happened next would force me to confront the harsh reality of my family dynamics and make one of the hardest decisions of my life. Update 1, let me share what happened when I made an unexpected visit to the house I bought. I wish I could say I was surprised by what I found, but deep down, maybe I knew something like this was coming. It started when I tried calling my parents one weekend to discuss the extra mortgage payments I'd been sending. Neither of them was picking up, which was unusual. They never miss a chance to talk about money. After several attempts, I decided to drive over to the house. What I found there changed everything. Perry answered the door, wearing pajamas like she owned the place. Her reaction wasn't, "Hey, good to see you," or even, "What brings you here?" Instead, she looked annoyed and asked, "Oh, what are you doing here?" as if I was interrupting her routine. I stood there, trying to process the scene before me. When I stepped inside, my stomach dropped. The house had been completely transformed into Perry's personal space. Her clothes were draped over the furniture, her art supplies scattered across what used to be our parents' dining room table, and her personal photos had replaced our family pictures on the walls. The spare room had been converted into some kind of a creative studio for her latest business venture. Apparently, she was now an aspiring social media influencer. "Where are Mom and Dad?" I managed to ask, still trying to maintain my composure. "Oh, they moved out a few weeks ago," she replied casually, as if this was common knowledge. "They found a nice rental across town." "Didn't they tell you?" They most certainly had not told me. I've been paying the mortgage on this house, sending extra payments, in fact, and no one thought to mention that my parents had moved out and Perry had moved in? The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. I sat down on the couch, which was now covered in Perry's throw pillows, and called my parents. Mom answered this time, and her explanation made my blood boil. "Oh honey, we meant to tell you. Perry needed a stable environment to focus on her career, and we thought this would be perfect for her. You're doing so well, and she needs a chance to find her path." When I pointed out that I was the one paying the mortgage, Mom's voice took on that familiar guilt-tripping tone. "After everything we've sacrificed for you, can't you help your sister? We're using your extra payments for our new rent, it all stays in the family." That's when I lost it. Stays in the family? I bought this house for you and Dad, not as a free crash pad for Perry. And you're using my extra mortgage payments for your rent? Without even telling me? Mom started crying, her go-to manipulation tactic, saying I was being selfish and that family should help each other. Dad got on the phone and started lecturing me about how I've changed and become materialistic since getting my tech job. The real kicker? They had already moved most of their furniture into their new rental, leaving Perry with the newer items I'd helped them buy for the house. They had planned this whole thing without ever consulting me, the person actually paying for everything. When I confronted Perry about contributing to the mortgage, she just shrugged and said, "I'm focusing on building my brand right now. Once I get my social media following up, I'll be able to help out." She said this while unboxing a new ring light I'm pretty sure was purchased with the extra money I'd been sending for the mortgage. I spent the drive home alternating between rage and disbelief. All those years of manipulation, the guilt trips, the family-first speeches, it was all just a way to keep me paying for everyone else's comfort while I put my own life on hold. I've been giving myself a few days to cool down and think clearly about my next steps. Part of me wants to immediately stop all payments and let them deal with the consequences. Another part is still fighting against years of conditioning, worrying about being a bad son who abandoned his family. But one thing's clear, this situation can't continue. I'm done being the family ATM. I've scheduled a meeting with my parents for this weekend to lay down some firm boundaries. Either Perry starts contributing significantly to the mortgage, or something's going to have to change. I'll update again after the meeting, but I can already tell it's not going to be pretty. My parents are masters at emotional manipulation, and I'm sure they're already planning their defense. But for the first time in my life, I'm ready to stand my ground, even if it means being the bad guy in their story. The irony isn't lost on me that I'm still living with roommates while my sister lives rent-free in a house I pay for. Sometimes I wonder how I let things get this far, but I guess that's what years of family guilt and manipulation can do to you. Update 2: The confrontation with my parents didn't go as planned. Actually, it went worse than I imagined. Let me share what happened during what turned out to be one of the most intense family meetings of my life. I arrived at their new rental apartment, which I discovered was actually more expensive than their previous place. The second I walked in, I noticed some new furniture and a large TV. Now I knew exactly where my extra mortgage payments had been going. They had strategically set up this meeting during a family dinner, probably thinking I wouldn't make a scene with food involved. Perry was there too, which wasn't part of my plan, but in retrospect, I should have expected them to stack the deck against me. Before I could even start discussing the house situation, they launched into their strategy. Mom had prepared my favorite childhood meal, Emotional Manipulation 101, and Dad started showing me photos from when I was young, talking about simpler times, when family meant everything to us. I tried to steer the conversation toward the actual issue. We need to talk about the house and Perry's living arrangement. The atmosphere instantly shifted. Mom put down her fork, Dad's face hardened, and Perry suddenly became very interested in her phone. "Look," I started, "I bought that house for you and Dad. Now you've moved out, given it to Perry, and you're using my extra payments for your rent. None of this was discussed with me, and it needs to change." Dad immediately went on the offensive. "So you're keeping score now? After everything we've done for you?" He pulled out a notebook, an actual notebook, where he'd written down every expense they'd ever incurred for my education. "Should we talk about how much we spend on your tech school? The sacrifices we made?" Mom took a different approach, tears already forming. She can cry on command, I swear. "We thought you'd understand. Perry is struggling to find her path, and we just want both our children to be successful. Isn't that what family does? Support each other?" Perry finally looked up from her phone to add her perspective. "I'm actually working really hard on my social media presence. I've gained 200 followers this month. The house gives me the perfect backdrop for my content. My lifestyle influencer career is about to take off." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Perry, you're living rent-free in a house I'm paying for, while I'm still sharing an apartment with roommates. How is that fair?" She rolled her eyes and said, "Not everything is about money. You're so privileged with your tech job, you don't understand how hard it is for creative people like me." That's when they dropped another bombshell. Mom nervously mentioned they'd told Perry she could convert the garage into a content creation studio. They'd already gotten quotes for the renovation, expecting me to pay for it, of course. I lost it at that point. This stops now. Either Perry starts paying her fair share of the mortgage, or we need to figure out a different arrangement. Dad slammed his hand on the table. "We put you through school. We gave up everything for your success. And now you're going to deny your sister the same chance? The same chance?" I laughed bitterly. Perry dropped out of high school. She's never held a job for more than 3 months. This isn't about chances, it's about responsibility. Mom started sobbing harder. "How can you be so cruel? We raised you better than this. Perry needs stability to pursue her dreams." "What about my dreams?" I shot back. "I've put my entire life on hold to support this family. I live with roommates, I can't save for my own future, and I'm paying for a house I can't even live in." The argument escalated from there. Dad started listing every sacrifice they'd ever made for me. Mom kept crying about family loyalty, and Perry accused me of being jealous of her upcoming success. Finally, I laid down my ultimatum: starting next month, I'm only paying the basic mortgage. No extras. If Perry wants to stay in the house, she needs to contribute. If not, we need to sell it. You would have thought I'd suggested burning down an orphanage. Mom wailed about how I was destroying the family. Dad called me ungrateful and materialistic. Perry stormed out, saying I was trying to sabotage her career before it even started. I left that night feeling both drained and strangely liberated. On the drive home, I started thinking about all the years I'd spent trying to please them, all the sacrifices I'd made, all the guilt I'd carried. For the first time, I saw their manipulation for what it was. I've already contacted the bank to stop the extra payments. Mom's been calling non-stop, leaving tearful voicemails about how they can't afford their rent without my help. Dad sent several angry texts about my betrayal. Perry's posted vague social media updates about toxic family members and dealing with haters. But I'm not backing down this time. I've spent too many years being the family ATM, putting everyone else's needs before my own. Something has to change, and if they can't see that, maybe it's time for more drastic measures. I have a feeling this isn't over yet, not by a long shot. But for the first time in my life, I'm ready to put myself first, even if it means being a bad guy in their story. Update 3. After that last confrontation, I made the hardest decision of my life. I completely stopped paying the mortgage. Let me share how everything finally came crashing down and where I am now. The first week after stopping payments, my phone exploded. I got 47 calls from mom, 23 from dad, and even Perry started messaging me on every social platform imaginable. I blocked them all, but they got creative, using friends' phones, creating new social media accounts, even having relatives I hadn't spoken to in years reach out. Mom's voicemails started with guilt tripping, "I can't sleep knowing my son has abandoned us." Then they turned desperate, "We'll lose everything because of you." Dad's messages were more aggressive, "No son of mine would do this to his family." Perry's social media campaign against me was particularly interesting. She started posting daily story times about toxic family members who sabotage your dreams. The most surreal moment came when I checked Perry's Instagram and saw she was hosting creativity workshops in the house I was paying for, charging people $50 a session for her insights into influencer lifestyle. She'd transformed the living room into a content creation space and was using my financial crisis as engagement fodder for her followers. Around week 3, the bank sent their first notice. Instead of addressing the situation, my parents forwarded it to me with a single message: "Is this what you want? To see your family homeless?" I archived the email without responding. Then came the flying monkeys. Family friends I hadn't heard from in years started calling, telling me how disappointed they were in my choices. My aunt sent a lengthy email about how I was destroying my parents' golden years. Even my old high school teacher reached out on Facebook to express concern about my recent lifestyle changes. What none of them knew was that I'd started therapy, finally, and was working through years of financial exploitation and emotional manipulation. My therapist helped me see that my family had created a dynamic where I was perpetually responsible for everyone's well-being except my own. The real turning point came when Perry launched her Rise Above, Surviving Family Betrayal podcast, recorded in the house I'd bought, of course. The first episode was all about how her privileged tech brother was trying to destroy her dreams out of jealousy. She actually managed to get a small following from people sympathizing with her struggle. By month 2, the bank's notices became more serious. My parents switched tactics, sending me photos of houses they were looking at, all significantly cheaper than their current rental. "See? We're trying to compromise," Mom texted from a new number. But I noticed they still hadn't asked Perry to contribute or find her own place. Perry's response to the impending foreclosure was to host a Farewell to My Dream Space live stream, complete with dramatic monologues about perseverance in the face of adversity. She even started a GoFundMe for her emergency relocation fund, conveniently leaving out the fact that she'd never paid a dime toward the house. The final straw was discovering that Perry had been subletting one of the rooms to a fellow content creator and pocketing the money. This was after Mom had called me crying about how they couldn't afford to contribute anything toward the mortgage. When the bank finally took possession of the house, Perry had to scramble to move her content creation empire back to our parents' rental. She made sure to document the whole thing for her followers, painting herself as a victim of circumstances beyond her control. The irony of her never mentioning who actually paid for the house wasn't lost on me. I got one last call from Dad, which I actually answered. Instead of the anger I expected, his voice was quiet, almost defeated. "We really thought you'd cave," he said. "We never thought you'd actually let the house go." That admission told me everything I needed to know about how they viewed me, not as a son, but as a reliable source of income they could manipulate at will. The aftermath has been both harder and easier than I expected. Harder because cutting off contact with your entire family, toxic as they may be, leaves a void. Easier because for the first time in my adult life, I'm only responsible for myself. I've moved into my own apartment now. It's small, but it's mine. Every decision I make is for my own future, not to fulfill someone else's expectations or demands. My savings account is growing, and I'm finally looking into buying a house, for myself this time. The family still tries to reach out occasionally. Mom sends holiday cards filled with guilt and veiled accusations. Dad emails articles about ungrateful children. Perry has apparently rebranded herself as a trauma healing coach, using our family drama as her origin story. But I'm done. The house getting sold wasn't just about property, it was about breaking free from a lifetime of manipulation and guilt. Sometimes setting boundaries means being the villain in someone else's story, and I'm finally okay with that. For anyone in a similar situation, it's never too late to stop setting yourself on fire to keep others warm. The guilt is hard, the manipulation is harder, but your life is yours to live. Don't wait as long as I did to realize that. Thank you everyone for the overwhelming support and kind responses. Reading your comments made me realize I'm not alone in dealing with family financial manipulation. So many of you shared similar experiences, and your stories gave me strength. This community has been incredibly supportive and validating.